Hey everyone, long time no see. It's Tori Rarick here, about to share a long-awaited conversation. I've been looking forward to this. Today's video is called Psychedelic Scaries. It's a pretty simple Q&A around my experience with entheogenic medicines, because I was once a scaredy cat. I was both a scaredy cat and a curious cat about ceremonial medicines and tiptoeing into that world. And I really love where I'm at in my relationships with each of the plants or fungi that have called to me, and I've answered that call. We've developed a relationship, and this is just like one facet of a conversation about psychedelics or entheogenic medicines. I really would like to speak on my experience with earth medicines, and what I mean by that are earth derived. Of course, you could argue everything's from the earth, or that, pharmaceutical grade synthetics and drugs are based on compounds from the earth, which is true, but I really like to and prefer to have experiences with plant spirits or fungi spirits, these, sentient beings, and that's what this conversation is based upon. In my experience and my journey into that, from, of course, as some of you know, being a pharmacist and really not diving into that world at all for a very good time of my life, because it just wasn't, one, the world I was in, too acceptable, and this is sort of like an offshoot of my cannabis podcast, 6 Degrees from Cannabis. There are 44 episodes archived on YouTube. I have to sip my tea. And I've shared quite a bit and shown really my whole journey from pharmacist to who I am now, which is someone who dispenses divinity and is an oracle artist and a spiritualist. So if you need more background about who I am, you can look for those videos, and I'll do my best to share them in little cards here and there so that you can understand where I'm coming from. But that being said, I'll share a little bit. So, right, my background is in pharmacy. I have a doctorate in pharmacy. And so, of course, my world was drugs. I got into the healing arts through the path of Western medicine. And even before that, I, as a preteen and adolescent, was really obsessed with that show Intervention. And so I'm saying this to say I was very keen and concerned about addiction. I even, in college, I got a scholarship to go to the Utah School of Alcohol and Drug Dependencies, and that was a very eye-opening experience. I had another conversation with a pharmacist, a cannabis pharmacist, Melanie Kane, a couple of years ago on that pharmacy podcast. We had both actually attended the same year, and we didn't know that at the time. And it came around. So that was a really eye-opening experience. Addicts came in and spoke to us. And it was interesting that, not really everyone had that opportunity that was going into these medical fields to really see how addiction can affect a life. That's not what I'm talking about today. However, I wanted to lay that basis of I had a lot of fear and fascination around topics like addiction. And I, of course, was fascinated by healing and moving towards wholeness and remembrance through what I later was introduced to as things like earth medicines. So I think it might be time to pull up the questions, and I'm going to try to keep this video to about half an hour. So if I don't touch on something I pride myself in is being a resource of resources. That's what I think a pharmacist's job is best, is to connect people with the resources that they need. So even though I don't work in the field directly anymore, I've taken that skill set with me, and I apply it to all the healing arts that I'm able to share these days. So I'm definitely going to put in timestamps as well if there's something specific that you're looking to hear my philosophy on. And that's really what this video is. I'm going to pause and put a disclaimer here. So please check that out. This is all going to be based on my experience and my philosophies on how I did cross that threshold from being a very scared person with no experience in entheogenic medicine to developing my own relationship and dosage and knowing what was right for my body and intuition and discernment around those types of things. And if you're doing that same path, you might find some enlightenment from what I share. If you know me, you know I'm a very intentional person. You know I really feel into something before pursuing it. And so you can refer back to any of my videos on YouTube or, my self-healing series online courses to really understand what that's about. I've been cultivating my own mindfulness practices and anxiety reduction journey and these ways of regulating myself over the last maybe close to a decade. So that foundation is essential. I found it essential for knowing myself under the influence of something else. Or being, I guess that's the best way to put it. I really had to feel firm in myself and knowing myself before I could lend myself or share myself with a medicine. So to give you an idea of how I moved forward with this journey, it might be surprising to some, but originally my philosophy was to ingest and explore organics, things like plants and fungi, things from the literal earth, over synthetics. That's just what I felt safest with. So that would be things like cannabis. I have the most frequent relationship and like closest relationship with her. Fungi, hape, CONVOS been in my vicinity. I don't have a relationship with ayahuasca. I have not felt that call, although others around me have. And LSD. Yeah. Now, the one that might like stick out to you in hearing that is LSD, but of course, being derived from the mushroom. And after so many years experience with mushroom and having a container that I really trusted, I have experienced LSD, and I think it rocks. The first thing we might go into is, of course, set and setting. That's a very big conversation in the psychedelic world. And this means considering the environment around you, who you're with, the physical space, the intention of the space, the relationships that I have with those around me. There are so many ways to go into that, and that's where that mindfulness and intentional and intuitive background really gave me confidence to step into this world, because I knew what felt right in my body. And I will also say there is like an initiation aspect inside of those sorts of things with your discernment that you will likely ingest in a set and setting that's not for you. And that's always information for later. Oh, this many people feels like too much, or this type of crowd feels like I was way too raw and sensitive, because these things do open you up. And so it's very wise to be protecting yourself, to be considerate of that, and then also knowing your dose, which is a question that came up. How do you introduce them to your body? Start low, go slow. That's a mantra in the CBD and cannabis world that I learned in the industry, but can be applied to so many medicines. Someone had a comment that they didn't ask a question, but they said, my favorite principle is you can always take more. Start small and work your way up. And I second that. I'm a microdose girly. I have a great time on a low dose of things. And I thought that was really kind of a special experience for people when I worked at Moon Mother Hemp, when they would come in and they would almost have like a non-experience with CBD. And I felt like that really changed their minds about the psychoactive effects and the spooks that they felt around it. Was that when they had almost a non-experience, it was like, okay, you could up the dose and you can feel that balance, and you can also see that you weren't out of your mind or something like that. How much is enough? I just feel like there's nothing to prove. There's no badge of honor when it comes to dosing, my badge of honor is knowing myself. There's nothing that feels better than knowing myself and knowing my dose for any specific set and setting, which isn't always a specific number or a specific, like, the same thing every time. Like, oh, I'm going to be in a group of people, so this is the dose, or I'm going to be alone. It is intuitive for me. So I always feel into that. And I know my medicine. And so, start low, go slow. I don't really like the experience when I feel like I've had too much, or I've definitely had more than enough. And I'm always, I would rather dial it up than dial it back. But as I've mentioned, it's sort of an initiation as well to go too deep. And that's always a possibility, and you have to be prepared for that as well. And that's where some of those techniques come in for soothing yourself and regulating, or having those around you that you trust. Because another question came up: how do you pull yourself back if you start to freak out? Those mindfulness practices, those somatic practices, they really pay off in those situations when you're feeling unwell, when topics and emotions come up that maybe you haven't been open to experiencing. But a lot of times for me, it just depends. I'm just like, I like talk myself through things a lot. I'm like affirming my my light and my ability to like pull through, and my ability to transmute what is coming up and like take it into the next phase of life with me. And that goes into conversations about integration and what happens after a specific journey, what happens after consumption. It's just as important to keep up with the threads of the information you received, and the experiences and the sensations that you had, in order to move forward. If you're taking them for benefit, for medicine. And this goes into a conversation that I had many times on my cannabis podcast. Joy, relaxation, celebration, those are all medicines. You don't like that can also be the point of something. So it's tricky to distinguish like recreation versus medicine at times. Because I think recreational use can be medicine. It can be healthy for you and healing for you to go out and have a good time and access joy and ecstasy and like very deep things. But a conversation and a topic that is coming up a lot in this world, but can be applied to everything, is the conversation of reciprocity. And I really specifically talked to Eliza about that in my cannabis podcast. But reciprocity, is there not only a taking from the plant, a taking from the spirit of the whatever fungi? Is there also a receiving and a giving? Is there an exchange of information, of reverence, of respect? Or are we leaning into like actual consumption and taking and raping? Because these are earth medicines. These are things that are produced not only for us to take, but to exist and to be part of the co-creation. So, wow. Maybe we'll take a beat there, and I'll drink in some plants and say thank you. So yeah, there can be so many reasons that you step into this world, but my crew and my preference has always been to meet medicines in a ceremonial space. And even when my friends are popping off with the medicines, we hold a very ceremonial container and a respect and a gratitude for the experiences. So maybe that would be like the next question. Do you always need a sitter? Again, this is like your discernment. There's much to discuss within this topic. These medicines are often communal medicines. These are things that have been passed down in lineages, within families, within communities, used in community healing settings. And there is such an importance on learning from one another, learning and teaching. And that's where guides come in, and like true authentic guides, right? Like those within integrity. But for me, yeah, like I've always leaned on the friends around me and the people that I've been in community with to show me the ways, to show me how to commune. And this still leans into things like set and setting. For safety reasons, many people feel more comfortable having a guide or a sitter with them. It's depending on your comfort. The dosage, I really feel, plays into that, and really the medicine. So I will say the only time I've had a sitter was taking a heroic dose of mushrooms. And that was later on in my journey. So I'd done many microdoses and macro doses leading up to that point, but I had not gone to lose my mind yet. And what came up for me in that journey was a deep fear of being alone. So I am super glad that someone was there for me, and a sister that I trusted was there for me. And something that I really believe is that like you're going to have the experience and the medicine within the experience that's meant for you. So should I have been alone during that experience, I know something different would have bloomed from it. I don't know what it would have looked like. I don't know what I would have accessed, but I like really lean into trusting my experiences with medicines, even if they feel more negative or dark or challenging. And I always know more for the next time. So yeah, that was the only time I had a sitter. I really did feel like I was going to be needing to be taken care of. You know, reminded to have water, or, you know, reminded of options, kind of like a childbirth experience, almost like a doula, of being like, okay, are you comfortable here? Are you stuck? Can I help you move something? And that goes into, of course, connecting with people you trust. But most often I am in prayer mode. I'm in solo prayer mode when I consume medicines, or I am in circle, oftentimes with sisters, but not always. And that doesn't like warrant a sitter, because we all kind of do the guiding and we kind of like flow with it, with each other. 1313, what's up, goddess? Okay, dosing is a big one. Again, I'm pretty intuitive with the strength of the dosing. You can really look up what feels macro, what feels micro. You have to keep in mind different routes of administration, especially when we're talking about, let's say, cannabis. There are so many ways to consume cannabis. So if I'm trying to do a specific prayer, I'm usually smoking cannabis. I like the smoke for ceremonial aspects of that element and the air, but also, you know, the peak is different. You know, topical things versus ingesting and like eating something, those are typically different purposes for me. Okay. So yeah, I'm intuitive about it. And by intuitive, I mean like I might hold the medicine in my hand. I might take a nibble of something and then return back to it. It might be, I might like see what my friend is doing and then like based off that. And I will say the first time I did eat mushrooms, I am a cautious kitty. I said that already. So I saw what my friend was taking, which she was like she was confident that that would be like fine. But I was still really nervous. So I still took less than what she recommended. I was like, girl. And now that I know my friends and I kind of like know how deep people like to go and like where they're at, that's also like a helpful gauge for me to be like, okay, they like to ride there. I'm going to dial it back, or I'm going to meet them. So that's what I sort of mean about intuitive. And, you know, there's always, these plants have spirits, and something you learn in herbalism is to ask for permission and to check in with the plants. So again, with this consent conversation and this reciprocity conversation, you may pick up a plant and you may say no. They might say no. Like what happened with the combo, let's talk about this. What happened with the combo is it started to come up in my conversation and in my consciousness. And that's sort of how I, as a projector, especially human design projector, approach plant medicine is I just wait for it to come to me. And combo was coming up in conversations. I was invited to a ceremony. I was like still breastfeeding. I'm still breastfeeding, but I was like definitely was relying on the milk more at that time, like more regularly. So I showed up to the ceremony, but I decided not to receive the combo. However, I was really drawn to it, and that woman ended up being such like a good friend. It's like a whole magical cosmic thing, but I still sat in ceremony, which felt amazing, and I did do the preliminary hape, which I had not had much experience with, like sacred tobacco or anything like that. So that was its own experience, and I still purged. And see, that's just one of those things where it's like, you got to know yourself. You got to know what you're feeling into. I did contact, it is hard to find information on things. That's why community is spoken word of mouth is important, and like experienced guides and those in integrity, etc. I reached out to someone who I really trust, and even she was like, I'm not sure about combo, because I did consume cannabis during my both pregnancies, but more heavily during my second one, or more regularly. I wouldn't call it heavily. And she's like a magic mushroom baby. So that's sort of like that was my gauge, just to let you know, is I was like, I'm pretty open to medicine and to healing experiences and intergenerationally. However, that one was like feeling like a no. So that's what I'm saying. You might receive the information to not have a dose, for the dose to be 0. And you might sit with it physically and not ingest it, and you might also like not be with it. That's for you to feel into. And I think that goes into the next question, which is about sourcing, which I'm not trying to like be talking about sourcing and get shut down here. But let me just talk about that process that I mentioned of allowing the medicines to come into my sphere. Until I have established this first invitation with a medicine, I have not gone and sought it out specifically. So like, pretty much like anything. And again, these are typically communal medicines, so they will like come up for you, or like someone will have them around, and then it might be your time to check in with if it's time or not, but it's also curious to listen when they're coming up more and more. And so that's sort of how I lean into things. Cannabis, mushrooms, the combo, LSD, all of that. So discernment is so important. I'm in a space, I'm in Colorado, where cannabis is legalized and for recreational use, and psilocybin is decriminalized. Everything has its risks, which, okay, we'll get into those types of things, but I trust my sources. There's always discernment. There's always testing your medicines, etc. There's always growing your own medicines, and yeah. That's what I'll say about that. The thing is, these medicines too have been underground and in the hands of healers for millennia, and like for a reason. And I get really fired up about being censored around these topics. And then I also have to like sit myself back, because there's a reason that these like very special earth medicines aren't for all. Safety. Let's just like talk about safety a little bit. How do you find safe? How do you find and trust credible sources and information on safety? It's a tricky question. I am even though I have this sciencey background and the world I came from was pharmaceuticals, you have to have discernment with that, just as much as you have to have discernment with like the unknown. And the more ethereal aspects of this. Discernment is so important. And even discernment of information that we receive, like say from the government or say from these authorities. So I'm very much into anecdotal conversations and evidence, which is why I had my cannabis podcast. I have a couple magazines over there and publications. I got used to trusting my intuition and others' intuition on medicines like this from being in the cannabis industry, seeing how mothers were utilizing the plants in the safest ways possible. And like, let's pull out that thread a bit on what I was saying about cannabis and pregnancy. From my perspective and being in the pharmacy world, I was like, it's medicine. And I'm an anxious person, and I'm a person that needs a little help with my mood regulation. And it's either the medicine that's like FDA approved, but has its own side effects and like true effects on myself and my baby, or it's this other medicine that I know and trust and have used around her conception, that I will continue with and that she'll be introduced to, not to also mention her endocannabinoid system and that whole built-in thing. But do you know what I'm saying? I was like, it's either this or that. So I used my discernment in that way, and I received anecdotal wisdom and word of mouth and oral tradition type history from other women that I trusted, to feel confident or at least feel supported in my choice to utilize plant medicines. There are some articles I could link in the down bar. You might have seen that 2010 study about, here, let's pull it up. Harms in the UK, a multi-criteria decision analysis. I think it was Lainey who brought this up in her episode. I love this graph, and they should like keep doing this because it's so curious to show. You know, they've listed alcohol, heroin, crack cocaine, all the way down to ecstasy, LSD, mushrooms, etc., and harm to users versus harm to others, because these are things that affect everyone, right? When we consume, it affects a community. And you'll see things like mushrooms, LSD, ecstasy on the list, not making a dent in harm to others. What is the most dangerous drug in the world? Something like alcohol. And it's really interesting how like people feel they need such hand-holding with things like psychedelics, but have been blasted with permission to consume something as dangerous and harmful as alcohol. So if you kind of like put your goggles onto both of those, it feels absurd. Like, how would we all just dive in the moment we're able to drink because it's like socially acceptable to do that, but then have all of these like reservations? And not to say that we shouldn't be wise when it comes to putting something into our bodies, but I do feel there might be more like leeway inside the psychedelic route than people expect. Is that helpful? Oh, let me just say right now, I love Mama De La Meco. I love Michaela and what she has to say about earth medicines and really any cyclical form of living. But Spirit Pharmacist is someone I also really trust. Ben, he is a psych pharmacist, and he loves to dive into the actual information and studies around things like, he moves into more like ketamine and MDMA, but he does talk about psilocybin, so I do look to him for those types of things as well. Someone just says, I waited until I was in my 30s to try because I was afraid I would trip and never come back. I totally relate to that. That's why I think set and setting is so important. Knowing how long the medicine will last. A lot, like what I experienced with cannabis and especially mushrooms is like this, like, you know, cyclical ebb and flow. And so even when you're feeling like, okay, I might be complete, something comes around again. So just time and space. A lot of us aren't used to having time and space, regardless of a communion, to sit and be restful and really like process something. So I'm very slow with my medicines. I'm very like laid back and wanting to have the proper container, set and setting in order to feel safe in everything that comes up. I totally get that. And I even feel that about like meditation and stuff, that like if I get too restful, I might not come back. But I think you will. How long do the medicines last? Okay, it says, and I don't know what that means. I don't know if they're talking like shelf life or they're talking about a journey. But as I just mentioned, these are long travels. These are long journeys a lot of times. So that's also important to consider in the setting. These medicines often feel like wavy and sort of cyclical, and that's why I think it's also important to be studying more of our cyclical nature, especially like a feminine cycle, to really be honoring that and understanding that and giving space to that. So yeah, you know, if I smoke, it might be like 2 hours. And I'm a micro girly, so things do be lasting. Things be affecting me. Okay, I think that's everything for today. So if I didn't answer something, feel free to leave it here and I'll do my best. I'm going to be having more conversations coming up. This is just sort of an opening into more of this. This is like part of a sector of my life and of my work, and so I think it's just important to continue having conversations and using my voice in this space. If you're wondering about these fabulous earrings, they're by my friend Carrie, and they're little cannabis leaves. I just harvested my first hemp plant this week. I'm really happy about it. And okay, you can find me. Sign up for my email list. It's toryrarick.com, where you can do that. I'll be sending you things in your inbox once a week. I have courses on all 7 chakras and one on shadow work, which I think shadow work goes well with mushrooms. And I think that heart opening in the heart module goes well with cannabis and so on. But I have all 8 online courses available for you to access and download and ritualize with. And of course, my Oracle deck. OMG, I can't believe I didn't mention that. So I wanted to share like what consumption looks like for me. It's different all the time, but I will tell you it's always ceremonial. It pretty much always involves smoke, smoke clearing, you know, let's say Palo Santo or an herb bundle, candles, fire element, all the elements. I have crystals around me. I'm saying my prayers. I'm singing my prayers. I'm dancing my prayers. Cards. Oracle cards. I have my Oracle deck, the Follow Your Heart Oracle deck, which was inspired by cannabis spirit, and I was pregnant with my daughter Daphne when I created it and hand painted the images, etc. So I use my deck as a guide for my journeys. I use Oracle cards as part of that divination and about receiving and directing my journey. And I talk about this when you sit in cannabis ceremony with me. I don't have to go into it too much, but it is on waitlist on my website if you want to hear about when it comes back in stock. And that's it. Thank you for watching and listening with an open heart and being wise and discerning about what to do with this information. Bliss be with you.